So an example of blacks being brainwashed, Revolt Summit 2020, coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Common Sense, Logic, and Reason. And as always, I want to say thank y'all for joining me today. So as you know, I have always talked about the concept of black people in America, black Americans being brainwashed. And I also talk about where this brainwashing and brainwashing programming comes from. You know, if the typical black American, you know, as far back as you can remember, you've been indoctrinated in a certain narrative. You know, basically Democrats good, Republicans bad. You know, white supremacy, racism. There's all this racism against us, and so on and so forth. Just victimhood on top of victimhood, you know. And by the time you become an adult, it's just so ingrained in them that it's hard to get them to snap out of that trance. You know, as the Bible says that if you raise up a child in the way they should go, they won't depart from it. Well, it goes both ways, whether it's something good or something bad. And trying to get these adults to depart from it is a difficult task, but with enough time and enough truth, you can do it. But like I said, it's brainwashing, and it's so prevalent amongst black people. And there's multiple evidence examples of this. But I'm gonna talk about one specific example, and this was the Revolt Summit of 2020. Now this took place like just before COVID and all the shutdown. This was like early 2020, and this was the one in which T.I. and Candace Owens was on the panel, and this was like a panelist of 7 people, including the moderator, most of them straight up brainwashed and leftists. There were really only 2 people on there who had their own mind, and that was Candace Owens and Killer Mike. So anyway, so let's go into some of this video, and I'm gonna illustrate just how brainwashed a lot of this nonsense is.
So to me, I think the main, I'm gonna run down a list of things, but they all kind of coincide together. I think that homegrown terrorism and crazy white boys with AR-15 shooting up innocent people. I also think mass incarceration, the privatized prison industry, the militarization of the police and how they interact with the people in our communities, and police brutality. I think all of those things, although they seem separate, I think they coincide. I think they correlate. Thank you.
So this was T.I.'s opening statement. You know, everybody on the panel was allowed to give an opening statement. This was T.I.'s, and he starts straight out with the nonsense. And this is perfect example of programming and brainwashing. He starts right out with nothing but racist rhetoric, and again, this is typically the black argument. This is the leftist black argument for racism and white supremacy, nothing but racist rhetoric. Now, he goes on about mass shootings and these white people in these mass shootings, but apparently T.I. didn't know, well, back then anyway, he didn't know that black people actually commit more mass shootings. And if you look at the definition of mass shooting, depending on where you are, it's either 3 or more or 4 or more people being shot. If that's the definition of mass shooting, black people commit more mass shooting than anybody. And then he goes on about mass incarceration, again, just more racist rhetoric. That's just more end result thinking. Even though there is a disproportionate amount of black people in jail, proportional to what we make up the population, but they always cry about mass incarceration, but while at the same time constantly ignoring the mass crime that leads to the mass incarceration. Then he talks about, you know, police brutality, which is very overhyped. Most black people in America will never have any negative run-in with police officers, but you got to understand that police respond based on to what the situation that they're in. If you are civil and calm, they'll be calm. You act like a jackass, they'll get to act like a jackass. And if these police officers are in high crime area where black people tend to be, they're going to be on a heightened sense of awareness. So oftentimes, the way the police respond to the public is going to be based on the way the public act and the way the public is. But they ignore what the public does. They just cry about the police brutality, the police response. This is so typical with brainwashed people.
go. Now we're even.
What he said was that.
So listen.
What he said was that there was good.
No,
on
no, no.
both
Let me
sides
finish.
of white
Stop, stop,
supremacy.
stop.
That's what
Because
he
you guys
said.
are so
That's
hung
not what he
up
said.
on
That's not what he
Charlottesville,
said.
and nobody.
Again, this is just another sign of being brainwashed. Believing things that the people tell you, largely the mainstream media, the mainstream liberal leftist media, believing what they tell you without any evidence, in spite of there being massive amount of evidence proving them wrong. Now, this whole both sides of white supremacy argument, that's absolute nonsense. If you actually think about it, it makes absolutely no damn sense. You telling me that white supremacy has two sides to it, and both sides of white supremacy were protesting against each other? Basically, what Donald Trump said, and we have the video evidence proving it. The man said that there were good people on both sides. You had good people, decent people that were protesting to keep the statues up, and you had decent people protesting to take the statues down. None of them were fighting with each other. And of course, Antifa at that time, which is always in the midst of violence, they were the ones starting the crap. But let's keep in mind that the people who were pro-statue, they're the ones who staged the protest, and the anti-statue people, they came interrupt their protest, okay? They could have had a stage of protest at another day. They could have staged it somewhere else. They decided to go out and protest and disrupt somebody else's protest. And you know, you never see that very rarely you see this from people on the right. If leftists want to protest, we'll let them protest because it's their First Amendment right to do so. You very rarely you see conservative people interrupting leftist protests like that. But they interrupt the leftists and interrupt conservatives all the time. But again, there were decent people on both sides. If there really truly were all these hateful people on both sides, there would have been larger clashes than what we saw, and possibly even more deaths. And really only one death. The few deaths was when the guy drove the truck and backed the truck like a professional stunt driver. But beyond that, it was a larger peaceful protest. But I'm still laughing at this both sides of white supremacy nonsense. That literally, I mean, that's the best example that the left can come up with to demonize the words of Trump, which are just flat out lies. In face of evidence, they just don't care.
Answer the question, and you're just gonna boo when I say slavery was all over the world, which is a fact. Why are you booing a fact?
Because you're making light of.
No, I'm not.
You're making light
I
of
haven't
the
gotten to my points.
enslavement
I'm not
of
making
people that look like us. You can't make light of that. That ain't nothing
I
you
haven't
breeze
even
over.
finished the sentence. How am I making
You
light of
started
anything?
with some bullshit.
Okay.
Well, Candace is right here, or she was right here. I mean, slavery was everywhere. This is an historical fact. I don't know why people are so upset and so enraged about this. You know, I don't know why T.I. got in his feelings, but it's a fact. Slavery was everywhere. So I don't know, you know, another sign of being brainwashed is getting upset and getting in your feelings over facts. Because people who are not in their feelings, facts don't upset you. Facts correct you, and you take those facts and you add it to what your argument already is, and you try to make your argument stronger. That's what common sense people do. People in their feelings, brainwashed people, don't do that because they have a narrative and they tend to defend their narrative at all costs, regardless of what the facts say. And like I said, perfect sign of brainwashing. Now, what kills me is another sign of brainwashing is hypocrisy, because if you're brainwashed, you will shift your argument back and forth to stay on your narrative, even if it includes being a hypocrite. You know, he says that she was making light of the mistreatment of the people who look like her by saying that slavery was everywhere, even though slavery was everywhere. But by that same logic, wouldn't T.I. be making light of the people who don't look like him? What about all the non-black people who were enslaved? So you making light of those people. So you get upset about making light of your people who look like you, but you have no problem making light of people that don't look like you. Again, pure hypocrisy and pure brainwashing. Literally.
I have a question. When you say make America great again, which period are we talking about? The period when women couldn't vote? The period when we were hanging from trees?
I'll answer.
Or like the crack era? Which period in America are you trying to make America like
So
again?
I actually think that I would totally rock a hat right now that said make Black America great again. Because Black
No,
America,
make America.
before,
We're talking
that's
about make
not the hat.
America.
But
That wasn't the
no,
question.
I am answering your
Which
question.
period was America great that we're trying to replicate?
Well,
Which era was it? Tell me.
I think I'll answer your question.
Tell me.
I'm ready to answer your question.
Which era was it?
What?
Which era was so great?
Here's the thing that you guys are forgetting. America was actually one of the slavery was all over the world.
Answer the
All over the
question.
world.
Man,
America
answer
was
the
no, I'm not saying it's okay. So why are you saying oh?
Hey man.
America was one of the first countries.
I
I'm
want to
trying to
like
answer
you
your
so
question, but I
bad.
can't. I'm
Because
trying to
you're
answer
so
your question.
smart. I want to like you so
I
much.
can't answer the
I want to
question.
hear
it
y'all.
doesn't
I want to be able to hear them.
If-
I want to be
if I
able to.
can't-
Candace Owens, you can see that she was caught off guard with his question. She didn't really know the answer. And you can see that she was trying to stall and talk to try to come up with a response. But in those situations, I say if you don't know, just simply say, you know what, I don't know. That's just the best thing to do. But if T.I., wanted to know what era, because black people are always brainwashed with the past and always crying about segregation, Jim Crow, stuff that's not happening anymore. But if he really want to know what era that Donald Trump is talking about, I can answer that for him. Well, first of all, let me start with the era that Donald Trump is not talking about. He's not talking about the era in which we or blacks are rapping about killing their own people, killing and shooting each other, not rapping about selling drugs to their own people, their own community. Okay, absolutely not that era, not the era in which we have that we as black people are 13% of the population responsible for 50%, more than half the murders, more than half the violent crime. That's not the era that Trump is talking about. Okay, he's not talking about the era and when we glorify thug nonsense, thug life. That's not the era that Donald Trump is talking about. Now, what era is Trump talking about? Well, he's talking about the era in which America actually made things, in which we actually built things, we produced, we manufactured. An era in which we had factories and mills all over the country. When middle America, a lot of these small towns were built on the backs of mills. A young man can graduate out of high school and get him a job and with making enough money to take care of family, something that's almost impossible today. This is what Donald Trump is talking about. We produce steel, we produce goods, we manufacture things, we exported them to the world. This is the thing that made America the richest country on the face of the planet, and the thing that really built America, not slavery. America did not get rich off the backs of slavery. That's nonsense and that's insane. So the era that Trump was talking about is the area of America producing and building and making stuff again. That's the era. And we saw that the economy got better under Trump because he did basically really the number one and the number two things that helps economies. And that is reduce taxes, reduce the burden on businesses that drive the economy. But this is the era, if T.I. was really interested in what era that Donald Trump was talking about, the era of Americans manufacturing, producing, and building, and making things.
Guys, the truth,
Candace,
the absolute
we
truth
got
about
you.
what is happening in Black America. You are being used, abused, and lied to and manipulated emotionally by the Democrat Party. That is what I am here to tell you. You want to keep
Candace,
uprising and talking about racism when they're taking our fathers out of the home, when they're making
said
welfare.
that already.
No.
We got you.
Because
So
we're
hold
seeing it
on,
happen
man.
right
Hold
here.
on 1 second.
Well, the moderator was right here because Candace Owens did bring up that point. She did bring up the point of the broken family and the absent father. I believe this was part of our opening statement. So he was right, even though he was straight up, of course, he was straight up leftist. But if what she said is right, and this is the biggest problem facing black people in America, which it is, far more than white supremacy, then what's the problem with her bringing it up again? Hell, she needs to bring it up a million times, and you keep bringing it up until we as black people correct it. So I'm trying to figure out what's wrong, what's the problem here. You know, if your car doesn't want to work, and you bring it to a mechanic, and the mechanic looks up the car and tell you what's wrong, if you keep asking him what's wrong with the car, he's gonna keep telling you what the same problem is. And this is what's wrong with black people: the broken homes, broken families, lack of fathers, and so on and so forth, victimhood, dependenthood. But here's my real problem with this, though. Again, hypocrisy coming out as always with these leftists is, how do you accuse Candace Owens of saying that already? When how long have black people been crying about racism, white supremacy, and systemic racism? You said that already. So there's nothing that pretty much was said on this panel as far as black victimhood that hadn't already been said a million times, but yet it's okay for them to keep saying the same thing over and over again. But they accuse Candace Owens of repeating the real problems facing black people in America. Again, complete hypocrisy and absolute brainwashing. Now I'm going to the last segment that I'm actually going to cover in this video.
Hold on.
I want to finish this.
No, this is on your behalf. At a certain point, we can't be assholes. At a certain point, these are black men and women, and in particular, these are black women. Like on some real G shit. It doesn't matter how you feel about her personally. Everything she has just said, Louis Farrakhan said for the last 25 fucking years. So with no, and I don't know if she's a fan of Farrakhan. I know me and Tamika are. Bam. But you cannot take the truth and be mad at who tells it to you. So just chill, bruh. Shut the fuck up. Let her say it and receive the information. That's it.
Now, this is the point in which Killer Mike defends Candace Owens. Again, proving and showing that he and Candace are the only two on this panel who have their own mind and can think for themselves. He came up and said, y'all are criticizing her because of saying something that basically Louis Farrakhan had been saying for years, for decades now. And then they cheer. Which brings us to probably the number one example of brainwashing of black people. They're more concerned about the messenger than the message. If somebody's giving you evidence and a message, information that's going to be helpful to you, why would you turn it down because of the messenger? I don't care who they are. If it's a quote-unquote, white supremacist telling you helpful information, why would you turn it down because you believe that they are white supremacists if there's information that's going to help you? Number one problem, example of brainwashing. And this is why Candace Owens could say something and they call her a coon, Uncle Tom, bed wench, sellout, and all this other foolishness. And then Louis Farrakhan said something and they celebrated him as a hero. Same thing is with Jesse Lee Peterson. He has his organization called Bond, in which he believes in you rebuild the community by rebuilding the man. They attack him. Same thing with Donald Trump. They call Donald Trump a racist. All these blacks who were rapping, celebrating Trump, rapping about want to be him, they called him a racist. Why? Because he ran as a Republican. If Donald Trump, with the exact same Donald Trump with the exact same message, would have ran as a Democrat, they would love him. Again, black people are absolutely brainwashed. It's just too much brainwashing amongst us. And this is one of all the problems that you see amongst black, throw brainwashing up there. Just too much of it is just too much indoctrination. And we really need to address these black people with all this foolishness, because this is what's keeping us down. This is what's preventing black people from prospering in America, while everybody else, including black people from Africa, who are absolutely killing it in America because of all this victimhood and this brainwashing. But no one can say that I'm wrong. I mean, I just illustrated a perfect example of how brainwashed people can be. People are indoctrinated by nonsense, repeating stuff that they can't really defend. Or they arm themselves with the example, but they very rarely could defend. And then they just believe what people tell them without even going out and looking for themselves. And given the fact that the evidence is right there, it's just a YouTube click away, and yet they still choose to believe and perpetuate stuff that was told to them. You know, both sides of white supremacy. Still scratching my head over that insanity. Anybody with half a brain can see that makes absolutely no sense. But anyway, y'all, this is a perfect example of how brainwashed blacks are. I gave you perfect examples of the mentality that you see from black people from constantly being indoctrinated at an early age to be victims. And I'll bring forward more evidence or more examples of brainwashing, but this here is just perfect example of the brainwashed of black people. Anyway, y'all, as always, until next time.